peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Call to order the meeting of the Jamaica Senate for Friday, January 24th, 2025. And before we commence, I would bring to the Senate's attention that we have visitors in the gallery. Tomlinson Christian Academy. From that institution, we have today one teacher, 13 students. They are from Buckfield in Ocho Rios. And I suppose I'll have a little discussion with them after, because I have to find out how the Suarez Circus went in Buckfield, Ocho Rios, so that I can give them a prelude in Montego Bay, because that's where they will be next. All right, so happy to have you here, and I'm certain you went through a particular session that we had this morning with the Integrity Commission, and this is now the Senate sitting today, and you will see how the process goes. So welcome again. We're happy to have you here. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the National Housing Trust for the financial year 2023-2024, Annual Report of the Montego Bay Convention Center for the financial year 2022-2023, Jamaica Public Bodies Second Supplementary Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2025, Jamaica Third Supplementary Estimates, 2024-2025, the Jamaica Gazette, Supplement Proclamations, Rules and Regulations 47, Volume 148, dated Saturday, January 18th, 2025, number 9, enclosing the Constitution of Jamaica, the Jamaica Gazette, Supplement Proclamation, Rules and Regulations 53, Volume 148, dated January 18, 2025, number 10, enclosing the emergency powers specified areas in the parishes of St. Catherine, Kingston, and St. Andrew, Regulations 2025, under the Emergency Powers Act. The Auditor General's Department Certified Appropriations Account under the head 15,000C, Capital, in the Office of the Prime Minister for the year 2020-2021. And by way of information, report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on its deliberations on Jamaica Public Bodies Second Supplementary Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2025, and the Third Supplementary Estimates of Expenditure for the financial year 2024-2025, if it so pleases you.
And sorry, before I go any further, on the agenda, I just wish to also have the Senate know that the substantive president is actually in the precincts of the Parliament, but he's presently engaged in, with the Indian High Commissioner. So I anticipate that once that is concluded, that he will join us in the chamber. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to sittings of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will say, as we have always said, one day backer is still backer. So if you are here, you are here, and we have no concerns about your management of the chamber, and therefore we were a little surprised at your indication this morning. Busha. Let's wait and see. The intention today, Mr. President, on the public business is to address the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Amendment Act 2025 and the Wildlife Protection Amendment Act 2025. And then Senator Hill will take the Income Tax Amendment Act 2025, and then we'll proceed with the State of the Nation debate. We'll move the relevant motion thereafter for the continuation of the debate, but we now start with the first two named bills. Mr. President, and it is, of course, intended to take both bills together because the nature of the amendments and the bills is such that they are complementary and easily debated together. Mr. President, the NRCA is, however, the country's principal environmental legislation. Section 3 of the Act establishes the NRCA, that is the authority itself, and its functions are essentially to take such steps as are necessary for the effective management of the physical environment of Jamaica so as to ensure the conservation, protection, and proper use of natural resources. It's supplemented by the Wildlife Protection Act, which is more limited in its scope, but which provides for the protection of certain wild animals, birds, fish, and for other matters relating thereto and connected therewith. Both pieces of legislation are administered by NEPA, by the National Environmental Planning Agency, and again, you understand the complementarity, which is why they are being debated together. Mr. President, over the last 2 decades, there has been an increase in the number of environmental offenses, and this has been globally as well as locally. They have the potential, and we all are aware that here in Jamaica, they have the potential to bring dangerous consequences. They weaken our natural defenses against hurricanes, for example, in respect of mangroves and coastal resources, and they compromise livelihoods. In the example of pollution and effluence, they compromise fish sources and freshwater sources in respect of our rivers, and are hugely disruptive in nature. And for this reason, and for these reasons, in fact, the government has been deeply concerned by these offenses, and so too have been many citizens and stakeholders, of course, including the opposition. In response to these deepening environmental offenses, the government, through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, in collaboration with NEPA, has embarked on a comprehensive program to strengthen the country's environmental policy and legislative frameworks. Those before us today, Mr. President, will be debated in more detail, but allow me to just share that the government has been taking several approaches to address the issue from all angles. The NEPA has, for example, instituted a number of intervention measures to bolster its monitoring and enforcement regime in fostering a culture of compliance with environmental laws. And some of these measures have included the development of a special monitoring list based on specific criteria, which includes those facilities and developments identified as requiring more stringent monitoring. Secondly, the establishment of a number of interagency partnerships, such as the Interagency Regulatory Monitoring and Review Committee for the bauxite and alumina industry. And these partnerships, again, allow for an enhanced and more joined-up monitoring framework, including several regulatory agencies in providing the necessary oversight for specific industries, sectors, and developments. And thirdly, for example, again, the expansion of NEPA's monitoring activities through the conduct of its environmental wardens program on the ground. So while solid waste, for example, has its environmental wardens that are more responsible for keeping communities clean, the NEPA's environmental wardens include, for example, recently trained about 30 river wardens that are responsible for monitoring the Rio Cobre. So they're pulled from communities along the trajectory of the river, and they have been trained in taking water samples even, and generally monitoring ways in which they can become aware if there's a problem before it becomes too serious. And of course, it ensures community engagement and buy-in because they have a greater understanding of not only of the challenges, but of their ability. They are empowered to be a part of corrective processes where necessary and preventing circumstances which are damaging from becoming even more so. So NEPA has been taking these efforts more broadly. And I share these initiatives because they complement the legislative improvements that are before us today to collectively or in aggregate ensure more effective enforcement and deterrence. Because of course, as the majority of the changes that are contained in these bills are largely increases in penalties and fines, we recognize that of course increasing the penalties does have a deterrent factor, but it will have the most effective deterrent factor if also twinned with more effective monitoring and enforcement. So both the NRCA and the Wildlife Protection Acts provide for penalties and custodial sentences and for breaches of their provisions. However, everyone concerned, government, opposition, citizens, stakeholders, everyone is agreed that the penalties under the current legislation are outdated and ineffective. Since the NRCA was enacted in 1991, for example, it has never been amended. And while the Wildlife Protection Act has been amended, the fines were only last updated in 1998. This update under the Wildlife Protection Act, for example, well, let me just say that in respect of the I think, most known clause under this, that is the protection of waters containing fish from trade effluent, for example, one that causes us all deep concern. And Section 18, which is the clause about persons found to be offending. They provide for fines of $100,000 in the first respect and $40,000. So even though they were amended in 1998, more recently than 91, the truth is that they are similarly woefully inadequate. Mr. President, they clearly therefore don't act as deterrents to noncompliance. Furthermore, the imposition of criminal sanction, element of criminality, is a serious and key element of the regulatory toolkit to foster compliance, and that applies to corporate as well as individual persons, recognizing that the corporate deterrent, of course, being financial, well, they respond to both, but the financial incentive for them is also greater, which we deal with a little later. Mr. President, this is why, recognizing the deficiency in the legislation is why Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister and Minister of Economic Growth and Job Creation, in his budget presentation for 24-25, indicated from then that the penalties under both acts would be increased, and those are the bills that come before us today. It was clear and clearly stated then from the budget presentation that they were being increased and the improvements were being made to the act to serve as a deterrent to the commission of the prescribed offenses and to more adequately address the gravity of the offenses, which have always been appreciated by the government. Mr. President, the amendments before us anticipate that both the fines and custodial sentences, where they exist, will be updated and increased. The maximum fine prescribed for an individual in both circumstances is prescribed, that is under both bills, is $5 million. which is up, as you're here, from as low as, well, lower than 40, but 40 in the case of the Wildlife and Protection Act. And under both pieces of legislation, one of the more significant improvements is that a body corporate that commits an offense will be liable on indictment and conviction in a circuit court to a fine. That is the new language. So going through, you'll find that well, let me not go into all the details now, but certainly the ability to make the fine at large before the circuit court for corporate bodies, corporates, rather than going before an RM court on summary, is a massive change to the disincentive, or rather the incentive to budget for regulatory breach, which is not unheard of in corporate entities, and that is not an accusation being made levied against any particular Jamaican company, but in regulating and in regulation and developing regulatory frameworks, the issue of incentive and disincentive for individuals and bodies corporate must always be at the forefront of policy and drafting. So now, instead of the maximum fine being before RM court and being governed by those limits, now a body corporate shall, where found liable, be brought before the court, and the judge will have the opportunity to calculate based on how egregious the offenses, the evidence provided regarding damage caused, environmental valuations, expert evidence that can, of course, share a greater, have greater impact on larger consequences for offending. And this is one of the most significant ways in which the acts ensure that the judicial system, the justice system, will be able to ensure that environmental crimes, that the punishment fits the crime. And of course, Mr. President, the details of the offenses and penalties under both bills are outlined in the schedules. Both bills create schedules which now simplify and expand the delineation of offenses, and they also change the language of the offenses themselves in certain respects where they have been deficient. They also modernize the language. So, for example, in wildlife, where the general language throughout is shall be guilty of and brought before a resident magistrate, if brought before, now simply speaks to it shall be an offense, and then there's a provision provided for what the consequences of an offense shall be under the Act. Mr. President, it is anticipated that these increased penalties, together with the improved enforcement mechanisms, will ensure more effective management and protection of our environment. I won't go through all of the clauses, won't go through through every clause in the clause by clause, as I am quite sure that colleagues have read both bills given their length and given the interest that we all have in matters environmental. But I will, of course, indicate Clause 1, as usual, the short title and construction, and it may be read and construed as one with the NRCA Act. Clause 2 amends Section 9, and it deletes the word license, which had actually caused some dissonance in the interpretation of the clause, which otherwise only refers to permits. And this is the all-important permitting clause within the NRCA, which requires entities to seek a permit to undertake certain action which may have environmental impacts. Clause 3 amends Section 10, which is a clause that deals with environmental impact assessments. And again, here it's really just speaks to persons who fail to submit an EIA as required, commit an offense. So it just simplifies the language. Again, for ease of enforcement, Clause 4 amends Section 12, which is the one which deals with the discharge of effluents or polluting matter. And again, the only section of that clause or subsection of that, the only subsection which is being amended is the one which states that a person who contravenes any provision within the subsection commits an offense. Again, it's just making the language more general so that the catch-all clause regarding the penalty for offenses or for offenses which have not otherwise been specified will apply. Similarly, in respect of Clause 5, which amends Section 13, and this is the section which deals with cessation orders and enforcement of cessation orders. This amendment here makes sure that there's a more effective enforcement mechanism in respect of where someone refuses to abide by a cessation order. And Section 14 is amended by Clause 6 just to delete the word "and" because of drafting. It doesn't change the operation of the clause in any way. Clause 7 addresses Section 15 of the Act, which deals with agricultural practices which have a polluting effect, and the issuance of notices. Again here, the amendment is only to ensure that the language states that someone who fails to comply commits an offense. Clause 8 deals with Section 16 of the Act, and again, this is about ensuring that the language of an offense, the language uses, is that someone who obstructs an authority or a person authorized that they commit an offense, and it removes its existence as a continuing offense, which is something that has been taken out throughout the bills in alignment with modern drafting practice. Section 17 is another one of the clauses that improves the enforcement mechanisms because this is a clause that deals with the power of the authority to require information for monitoring purposes. And here it makes quite clear that a person who refuses to allow the authority or the relevant agent of the authority to obtain this information or refuses to provide information for monitoring purposes where the authority thinks that there may be pollution occurring, that now becomes an offense. And again, becoming an offense, it's subject now to this larger body of penalties in respect of the body corporate being submitted to the circuit court, and of course the maximum increase of the fine in respect of individuals. Mr. President, Clause 10 deals with Section 18, again in respect of enforcement notices, and here it is again that the offense provision is being redrafted in a way that allows the general catch-all clause to apply. And Clause 11, which deals with Section 20, again also deals with persons who assault or obstruct authorized persons of the authority in the execution of their duty, again making it an offense. Mr. President, the Clause 12 creates the amendment to Section 32, which is the clause that refers to the overarching power of the NRCA in respect of offenses which may not otherwise be identified or captured in any clause under this Act or otherwise. So it is a broad where there's no specific offense in respect of an environmental matter. Section 32 gives the broad overarching power of the authority to take action. And here, again, enforcement is being strengthened by ensuring that the penalty for obstructing anyone who is taking a measure in respect of these, of such contravention of the Act or contravention of the authority of the NRCA, that the penalties for their offense will be greater. Clause 13 addresses Section 38, subsection 3, which again is about expanding the maximum penalty, and here it moves from $50,000 and imprisonment for 2 years, not exceeding 2 years, and it moves to the maximum of $5 million, and in default of payment of such fine, imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. So there's a significant strengthening there, Mr. President, and we anticipate that to have the requisite impact. Clause 14 deals with, or rather creates a new 38A, which is where we get the insertion of the new third schedule, setting out and defining the offenses, very specifically, particularly modern language, and the offenses, or rather the fines, the penalties under column 3, and on the column 4, the maximum term of imprisonment where imprisonment applies. And here they are aligned, Mr. President, with the maximum of $5 million. Otherwise, for smaller offenses, a maximum of $1 million and $3 million, depending on the particular offense. Mr. President, in respect of the wildlife...
Madam, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just before you go on to the other bill, would you just permit me? We are joined by His Excellency Mr. Joshi, the Indian High Commissioner, who paid a visit to the Senate this morning. I don't have to tell you about the importance of the relationship between our two countries. And he was pointing out that they celebrate the 180th anniversary of the arrival of the first Indians to Jamaica. So I just crave your indulgence to allow me to introduce him to the Senate and to acknowledge his presence here. Thank you. Sorry to have interrupted you.
Not at all, Mr. President. If I were to be interrupted for any reason, this would certainly be a good reason to be interrupted. Welcome, High Commissioner. It's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for your interest in conveying more information about the important relationship between our countries to the President. And we look forward very much to celebrating with you on Sunday. Absolutely, as we celebrate Republic Day. Thank you very much. Thank you for being present with us. Appreciate it. Mr. President, the Wildlife Protection Act is less lengthy than the NRCA and more easily summarized in terms of its amendments. I will state that Clause 1, of course, ensures that the Act is read and construed as one with the Wildlife Protection Act. And just I can signal that Minister Samuda has indicated that there will ultimately be a repeal and replace of this Act in order to allow us to accede to the SPA Treaty. I know that was not intentional. So the SPA Treaty, which I know at least Senator Fraser Binns is interested in, and it's been long outstanding for us to be able to ratify our participation in that convention. But because wildlife protection doesn't include flora, it's going to have that in to have the appropriate biodiversity scope in order for us to comply. So this is the first arm to ensure enforcement while we include all the relevant aspects to allow us to ratify. So I know that's something that will be a good day to celebrate and a good marker of progress. So here in this limited bill, Mr. President, before us, Section 2 makes just a few amendments updating the language of the bill for alignment with other legislation the Senate has passed. So the meaning of vehicle, for example, the meaning of aircraft, in accordance with Civil Aviation Authority and Road Traffic Act, respectively, and of course by appropriately identifying, defining, and locating the exclusive environmental zone for the purposes of the application of the Act in modern times. Mr. President, the Act makes the changes which I referred to earlier in respect of the inclusion of a schedule, a third schedule in this context, a fourth schedule, pardon me, which includes the definition of offenses, column 3, again, with fines, and column 4, with maximum terms of imprisonment. The matter of bodies corporate going before the circuit court also follows through, and in the individual fines also being relevant, having the limit of 5 million also present. Just want to highlight that the regulation making power that's provided for under Section 14 and the failure, or rather the provision of the maximum penalty, those are both in the same section and therefore dealt with by Clause 5. Again, you would see here that the matter goes from $100,000 to $5 million in terms of maximum, and imprisonment, again, from 2 years to 5 years. Again, supplementing the matter of enforcement, the offenses in respect of matters like the power of that refusing to allow a fisheries inspector to enter property where he believes that an offense may be being conducted, that again is amended and addressed in this bill for effectiveness, and its enforcement by a constable, also addressed by Clause 7, which is addresses the general offenses provided for under Section 18. Mr. President, Clause 8 amends Section 20, which addresses the issue of the schedule of offenses, the fourth schedule, as well as the action to be taken against bodies corporate. Mr. President, I think that it is quite clear that, again, recognizing that we are indeed all agreed that these offenses have long required, or the offenses under these acts have long required updating, and it is a good thing that the Senate is today charged with updating them meaningfully and in a way that they will serve as deterrents to the commission of the prescribed offenses and also reflect the gravity of the offenses, especially when twinned with how they are also being included in respect of enforcement clauses in the bills. So, Mr. President, I'm confident that we all will see that these amendments are necessary and appropriate, and therefore look forward to other members' contributions as we undoubtedly support the passage of these bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister.
President.
Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are some bills, when they come to the Senate, really need for the other side to say, we agree. And this is one such bill. Minister, on this side, we stand in full support of the proposed amendments to the Wildlife Protection Act and the NRCA Act. Indeed, I agree with you that they have been long in coming, but the time is here, and we stand in full support of these amendments. Minister, there is just two things I want to say. One is that I note the increase for bodies corporate, and whereas we are not saying that pollution does not take place by individuals, the truth is that when one looks at the type of corruption, the type of pollution that has taken place and the persons who have been accused of these they're generally bodies corporate. And I think by putting the penalty at 10 million, it is sending a message. It is sending a message, sorry, yeah, that is the upper limit. It is sending a strong message that together we are serious about the protection. And note I say together, we are serious about the protection of the environment. I want to find out when will it come into effect. And finally, that we commence a process of public education, just so persons become more aware. Because I believe that if enforced as they ought to, these amendments will be a game changer for the protection, the preservation of the environment. And finally, Mr. President, in closing, the only thing that would make today even better would be the debate of my motion, Minister. Yes. That was tabled some time ago. But I do know that in short order, we will debate that motion. With that being said, Mr. President, on this side, we stand in full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Sapphire Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this, another very important piece of legislation. I will start by saying that, it is recognized the value of our environment. And I'm really very happy that this is definitely one of those spaces, Senator Fraser-Binns, that there's no contention. And especially within the presence of our children who are here with us today for this effort to be recognized in this way. Mr. President, the right to the environment and the presence of a clean space is actually a constitutional protection of ours. And so these efforts by the government to raise these fines and elevate it to the Supreme Court level for these bodies corporate for compliance, I very much welcome. And I want to just also take the opportunity to also bring awareness. You know, when I went through the legislation, Clause 411D came to mind, and I actually questioned the vulnerability of persons who are not body corporate in terms of oftentimes when you're driving past a river or you go to the river, you see persons who are washing their clothes or persons who might be, you know, doing some sort of small application to enhance their lifestyle somehow. And as is, there might be some vulnerability to those individuals. I am asking that we especially put a public relations campaign, education, that is geared towards the protection of the environment, but also educating persons as to how to safely use these rivers, especially as they go about their daily lives. It's not a matter that we want to stop it. We know what the phosphates can do in some of the detergents and how it can affect algae growth and so forth. But perhaps these environmental wardens, the river wardens, Minister Camino, they could be brought in to specifically educate, especially the individuals who live locally around the rivers, as to how to perhaps do a catchment thing where they take the water out of the river and wash the clothes on the side and not necessarily put the detergent in the river itself. I just want to bring that point across, Mr. President. The other, because this is about our very precious commodity of our water supply and rivers. Jamaica is a land of wood and water. And with where we're going globally, and we recognize concerns around water supply, et cetera, we have to do as much as we can to preserve these spaces. You know, one of the other issues that I hope that especially these river wardens could probably help to address is the garbage that sometimes collect at these river spaces. As you go there and you're engaging in the space, there's usually a lot of garbage. Can we put some more garbage receptacles? Can we teach and educate persons, especially a specific campaign around this? It is not just about the bodies corporate who affect this environment, and what we can do is teach persons who are utilizing this space to maintain it. And Mr. President, lastly, just in my little bit of research, maybe some of these bodies corporate could be incorporated into helping to preserve a preservation process. Because one of the things that helps to preserve our rivers is planting trees and doing environmental adjustments that are positive. So when you plant lots of very heavy-rooted grass or trees, it actually preserves the river and maintains it for as best as possible longevity. And so, Mr. President, my contribution is one, to celebrate the fact that we're taking it to this level, but also to emphasize that very significant public education campaign that I think we need to really, really put significant effort behind in terms of ensuring that persons who are using the rivers are using them properly, but also to educate them about the consequences of this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Longmore. And I fix up all chair. Senator Abka-Fitzenley.
Thank you, sir. I rise to indicate that I'm in full support of the bills which propose to amend the Natural Resource Conservation Authority Act and the Wildlife Protection Act, which are now before this Parliament. I note that in general, the bills propose to increase fines and update custodial sentences, and it also seeks to modernize the legal framework for environmental management in Jamaica. The proposal for the maximum fines for some offenses under the NRCA Act and the Wildlife Protection Act, to my mind, is a step in the right direction. At the heart of some pieces of legislation which propose to impose custodial sentences or fines is to act as a deterrent. I'm heartened at this increase, and I'm optimistic that this increase will go some way towards acting as a deterrent to people, individuals, or companies which might be minded to breach our environmental protection laws. I don't think there is any question, sir, that the prescribed fines outlined in the draft legislation that's before us today are more proportionate to the offenses compared to what existed before. I believe this legislation was last amended approximately a decade and a half ago. The amendments which we propose to make today are indeed timely. I'm heartened as well that the bill does not propose to trespass on the discretionary power of members of the judiciary, who, when these amendments are passed, will have ample space to apply penalties according to the severity of the environmental crime. You see, sir, there was a time in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, certainly between 2016 and 2012, where I'm of the view that environmental protection was treated as a back burner issue, and one that presents itself as a potential annoyance to the process of national development and an impediment to the goal of getting our economy to expand by more sizable margins. I'm confident that a series of actions taken by this administration, including the move to amend the NRCA Act and the Wildlife Protection Act, reiterate that this administration does not believe in merely giving lip service to protecting the environment, but we are taking tangible action in support of this noble cause. On the matter of the environment, sir, it is worth noting that it's the administration of Prime Minister Andrew Holness that declared approximately 80,000 hectares of the cockpit country as protected, a matter that was discussed for decades upon decades upon decades. I distinctly recall as well that it is this administration that abandoned what appeared to be plans to cause prospecting licenses to be issued for the cockpit country. It is good to note that it is this administration that also moved to impose a plastic ban to demonstrate how serious we are in treating with the matter of protecting the environment. The administration has also moved to pass approximately 14 forestry orders, bringing Jamaica beyond the approximately 30% mark that the UN prescribes for protected areas. I recall as well, sir, when I was in media, there was talk about development, commercial development on the Goat Islands. A lot of talk about it. And a former cabinet minister in the PNP administration said to myself and a colleague that the administration would consult as widely as possible. They won't be accused of not appearing to consult. But he said Goat Island would happen. Yes, that's what he said. And that plays into a sort of sentiment that, potential buildings or commercial development can create jobs. And why are environmentalists making a big deal of Too Little Lizard? I recall that being said when the whole idea of Goat Island development was being actively pursued by the erstwhile PNP administration. I am proud, sir, to be part of an administration which recognizes that the issue of environmental protection is not merely about lip service, and it's way more nuanced, and that we have taken a series of credible legislative steps to show that we value the protection of the environment. I recall as well that when the current administration came to office on the matter of environment, there was discussion among the former administration, the former executive, about a coal plant in St. Elizabeth. And I could go on and on and on concerning legislative steps taken by this administration to protect the environment. Indeed, sir, I believe it's a fair statement to say that no administration in the history of independent Jamaica can test or has a more credible track record at protecting the environment than the administration of Prime Minister Andrew Holmes. And that, sir, is because the Prime Minister and Minister Matthew Somuda, who they have a grasp of the issues, and they understand that for the sake of current and future generations, whether human, flora, or fauna, an investment in environmental protection is one that we cannot afford not to make. And before I close, I'd encourage our partners in corporate Jamaica, including stakeholders in the mining and bauxite industry, to understand that there can be no prosperity steeped in pollution. And no sustainable economic development can be achieved by way of environmental degradation. I strongly encourage our partners in the private sector, and in particular in the bauxite and alumina industry, to appreciate this fact. It is in that brief context, sir, that I support passage of the bill which is before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fitzgerald. Senator Brown.
President, thank you. I'm going to be batting later, but I must, since Senator Fitzgerald intervened, must use my knowledge of history to tell him that the first government to include a portfolio on environment was the Michael Manley government of 1972. To show serious we were and decide about, and are still, about the environment, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson-Miller appointed a Minister of Climate Change. And they scoffed at it. We soon tell you later on. He didn't import ice, that's for sure, we know. But Mr. President, we are concerned about the secret deal by NEPA with a private sector company, read the pollution in the Rio Cobre. We are concerned about the denigration of the Falmouth mangroves to facilitate the building of a gas station by a connected parties. And we took into account the concerns of the people of Portmore in putting the Portmore highway, leg of the highway, something that they oppose, and we ensure that the mangroves were replanted and they're growing. Let us stop playing politics where politics is not necessary. Senator Abka, Fitzhenley, both sides have had errors on the environment. Both sides have worked to improve the environment. We're not going to make any big thing about special mining lease 173. We're not going to do that. The reality is this country, oftentimes, like all countries, have to make a choice. In fact, Senator Hill, your favorite U.S. politician is drill, baby, drill. Your favorite politician in the U.S. is about drill, baby, drill in environmental protective areas. Mr. President, I just simply said to Mr. Parliamentary Secretary Fitzhenley, I know you have to speak because you have been paid to do that. But the reality is, let's recognize that there's balance needed on the environment. May it please you, Mr. President. And I yield and reserve for the rest of my State of the Nation presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the first thing that I wish to do, and I thank Senator Fraser-Binns for her very positive presentation, and I do take very good note of the fact that she could have been a lot more expansive because her passion for this area is authentic. It's an authentic one, and there's much that she and Senator Samuda, former Senator Samuda, Minister Samuda, agree and have in fact consulted and collaborated on in the addressing of these issues. This is not to say, however, that what Senator Fitzhenley said in respect of the primacy of this administration in the implementation of real change in the management of the environment is not true. We have done a lot. We have protected orders. We have, in respect of forestry, in respect of our maritime territory, our, the achievement of our NDCs and what we have been doing generally to protect the environment has really been commendable, and therefore I must say that, that it is a matter that is worth emphasizing. And it is a matter of fact and a matter of record. But I do want to clarify a point of fact. Senator Fraser-Binns, an earlier version of the act had intended, of the bills rather, had intended to limit corporate liability to 10 million, but it is now at large. In the bill that was passed in the lower house, when it went through LegCom, you may have seen an early bill during the consultative process, but during the legislative committee and review process by cabinet, what was agreed was that the Supreme Court would be at large in defining the ultimate penalty that a body corporate would have to pay. So it is not limited to 10 million. It is, in fact, at large. And that, I think, it sends the biggest possible signal to corporate entities that we're serious about environmental crime. So I wanted to make that point clear because even as you speak about it as well, I know it's something that you would recognize and promote. On the matter of public education, which both yourself and Senator Longmore mentioned, this is in fact, will be done, meaning the ministry will undertake and NEPA will undertake a public education campaign in respect of the act, the new acts and the new offenses, as not so new offenses as clarified, but the new penalties. That those will be clarified and shared with the committee, with the communities and with the country at large. There will be an island-wide public education campaign. But also I wanted to clarify that the river wardens of which I spoke earlier are charged with educating their communities about proper use of the rivers. It's not only monitoring and testing, which were examples that I mentioned, but they are responsible for cleanliness and for teaching proper use teaching proper use in their communities. And again, the individuals are taken from the communities. So there's ownership and buy-in and genuine care for getting things better, having shared new information and educated and empowered people in these roles. There is also to be a river unit created within NEPA. And the policy has been approved for that, and advertisements have actually been published in respect of personnel to actually start to populate, because we recognize the importance and we do continue to protect mangroves. We've protected approximately 45 hectares of mangroves and continue to do more, both in international partnerships, through UN, through particular programs with the UK, as well as through pure national budgeting. And we have recently approved in Cabinet the National Mangrove and Swamp Management Plan, which will allow for even more effective and greater replanting, because we recognize their importance to coastal retention. There will also be a freshwater and swamp policy. That is, the drafting of that has started, and that is important work again. Just recognize that there's so much to do in the environment as our knowledge improves and as we continue to implement best practices, being committed very much to making sure that we do all that we can in respect of creating a better Jamaica. Also, because I know that he will have a long run-up and stance at the wicket, I just want to mention that in respect of the other matter raised by Senator Brown, I just want to make it clear for the record of this chamber that Minister Samuda had spoken to that matter, and not only did the relevant chairman resign, but our government, through Minister, made quite clear that we did not believe that the matter had been handled in an appropriate way with the requisite levels of transparency, and that there was an insistence that the company involved take corrective action, and the cleanup and restoration efforts, which were conducted under the guidance of NEPA and the Water Resources Authority, that those costs greatly exceeded the fine by multiples, and they were borne by the company. So I just want to say that we are not here speaking words. We are serious about the environment and its protection, and that therefore should be a matter of record. There are things on which we agree, but there are things on which we are not the same, and our records are not the same. And while you have taken certain actions, we have taken certain substantive actions as well, but far more extensive than had been done before. Things are a matter of record, so we shouldn't, and we don't have to be aggressive or offensive about it. They're simply true. And that is, there are differences between us. Mr. President, I'm asking for second reading of the bill, and that the matter be put before committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thanks for those who contributed. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
An act to amend the Natural Resource Conservation Authority Act, read a second time, and also an act to amend the Wildlife Protection Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider both bills, clause by clause.
Mr. President, might I ask, given that there is likely to be little disagreement, while both bills have to be taken separately, is it possible to take segments in en bloc, to approve en bloc? Thank you.
That's an original idea, Minister. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me deal first of all. Thank you very much, Minister. Let me deal first of all with an act to amend the Natural Resource Conservation Authority Act, and I'll take clauses. 1 minute, let me just deal with this. Yes. I'll take clauses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those in favor? Against? I'll take clause 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I'll take clause 15. Those in favor? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? The ayes have it. There's a schedule here, eh? 15 involves the schedule, right? The Minister, I thought I overheard you, but 15 involves the amendment to the schedule. I'm going to deal with now the amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act. And I'll put clauses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those in favor? Against? I put clauses 6, 7, 8, and 9. Those in favor? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report both bills as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Thank you. I do report the bill as having passed committee. I do report both bills as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Ayes have it. Minister? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I ask for third reading of the bill, might I just point out that there are two printing errors. One is in the title of the NRCA Act, which should have an S at the end of resource. So it's National Resources Conservation Authority. It's not an amendment. It's just a printing error I'm pointing out for the record. And
in the original, the title itself, an act to amend the natural resource. Resources.
Right. And on page 3 of the Wildlife Protection Act, indictment has a spelling error. There's a printing error there. So just indicating for the record and asking for third reading of the bill.
Thank you. The question is that an act to amend the Natural Resources Conservation Act be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? And an act to amend the Wildlife Protection Act be read for a third time. Those in favor?
An act to amend the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act read a third time and passed. And an act to also an act to amend the Wildlife Protection Act read a third time and passed.
Is it proposed to do any further business today, Minister?
Mr. President, it is intended to continue the legislative agenda. With Senator Hill's piloting of the Income Tax Amendment Act, thank you, and proceeding then with the State of the Nation debate.
Thank you very much. Minister Hill, you are known beyond this chamber for alacrity, so you can move. You didn't hear that, you know, Senator?
No, I know whatever she said
No,
would
she
be
said,
nice, Mr.
your
President.
brevity knows no bounds. I'm not so sure about that. Eh? Okay, them gone already?
Before you joined?
Sinclair.
You were very late. Mr. President,
Today I rise to introduce Income Tax Amendment Act 2020.
Take picture of the picture.
To the Senate. Mr. President, before I go any further, because I know my colleagues across the way are very interested in this. I'd like to move with alacrity, Senator Brown. But there are some things that are so good that they take repeating. So very good that they take repeating. I would suggest that anything that you have that is not worth repeating, you should remove it. But here we go. Mr. President and my colleagues on this side and that side, with strong macroeconomic fundamentals, Jamaica was able to introduce measures aimed at facilitating and enabling trade, reducing administrative inefficiencies, and offsetting the loss in purchasing power to citizens because of global inflationary pressure. The government of Jamaica, in this instance the Andrew Holness administration, has been able to create more fiscal space through the progress made in improving the general macroeconomic conditions and reducing the country's debt. With the available space created and in keeping with the overarching policy agenda, the revenue measures introduced for financial year 2024-2025 by Ministry Paper number 1124, 11/24 rather, dated March 12, 2024, aimed to encourage and improve productivity by stimulating investments in renewable energy. The revenue measures also aim to provide support for companies providing trust and corporate services. And Mr. President and my colleagues in the Senate, trust and corporate services is a big part of the future growth of this country. We are clearly never going to be a manufacturer in the range of the United States, China, or Mexico. But we know that we can certainly be a force for good and for bettering Jamaicans by looking at the corporate services activities that are outlined in the trust and corporate services arrangement. We're also looking at low-income earners. You will see this bill looking at that, vulnerable groups such as pensioners. These efforts ensure that the most affected populations receive targeted assistance, reinforcing social equity and reaffirming the fact that the Andrew Holness administration really and truly is a caring government. By creating an enabling fiscal environment through these measures, Mr. President, Jamaica is working to strengthen its economic framework while addressing social and environmental challenges. This balanced approach underscores the government's commitment to fostering economic growth, enhancing equity, and building a more sustainable future. Mr. President, the following measures were introduced as part of this year's budget presentation. As I mentioned, providing trust, a 25% income tax rate for companies providing trust and corporate services. This is important because the companies operating in the financial services sector, especially deposit-taking institutions, are charged a 31% tax rate. In order to encourage 31, the effective rate might be 35. Yes, 33 and a third, effective rate about 35. But these trust entities, Mr. President, are being encouraged to come here for a tax rate of 25%, which is a normal corporate tax rate in Jamaica. We think that's important, and we will expand on that a little bit in a short while. Redemption, the second one is the redemption of the corporate income tax rate for independent power providers, producing 75%. There's a minimum, a floor rate of 75% or more of their energy from wind and or solar, and we're reducing that tax rate from 33 1/3% to 25%. To 25. And in the third one is increasing the age, that is 65 and over, and pension exemption from 80,000, and this is big, Mr. President, from 80,000 to 250,000 each. The Andrew Holness administration, Senator Bunting, is really a caring government. We're getting to 1.7. Don't rush me. Eh? You will like it when I get there. And how? And here we are, Mr. President. The fourth one is the increase in annual personal income tax threshold from 1.5 million to 1.7. Let me just read it out full, Mr. President. 1,700,088. Mr. President, that's enhancing and expanding the really glorious 1.5 that became enshrined in our brain in 2016 and will never go away. It is a kind of, that could never be done. We were told by them, couldn't be done, can't work. Well, yes, full front page of the newspaper. May have it. May have it. So, Mr. President, that 1.5 which energized Jamaica, when people said it couldn't be done, we didn't just give it to some people, we gave it across the board, but the special beneficiaries were the people who were in the police force, the nurses, the teachers, all benefited from this. And Mr. President, I am so pleased to report they are still benefiting from it. It's the gift that never goes away. Every single year they get the benefit from that 1.7 million. We've raised it, and I'm so happy to say that because it's an outstanding creation that we instituted, and I could spend all day on that, but there's a number 5. Number 5 is an increase in the maximum participating voting share for the junior stock exchange from 500 million to 750 million. Not the thing is a big thing, Mr. President. Yesterday, I went to one of our wonderful banks in the country, and a young executive took me aside and said, I want to really thank the Andrew Holness administration. I heard the press conference by Minister Favour Williams and you last week, where you made it clear that you were raising the 500,000, Minister Williams and myself did, from 500,000 to 750,000. 750 million, sorry, Mr. President. It is so outstanding. They have been asking for it. In other words, what that means is a company can go to the junior stock exchange for up to 750 million, and they get all the tax exemption benefits that existed for 500 million. We've changed it. It's a marvelous thing. It is to encourage, and you will love this, Senator Brown, more companies to employ more people, which may join unions. Yes. Senator Gale, but they will also be earning a lot more money. This government is about making sure we do things that make the economy grow, not just for the rich Tapanaris, but for ordinary Jamaicans who are investing in the junior stock exchange. one of the Tapanaris. Mr. President, I want you to take, no, this is a great deal of fun, but there's something serious here. In 2014, when we were going through the IMF exercise, that famous exercise where before that time, all people talked about, people who wrote on economics and finance called Jamaica basket case. One of the things that every time Dr. Stein came and subsequently Dr. Ramakrishna came to us to see the leader of the opposition then, will you keep the agreement? Shadow Minister Shaw was there, now Minister Favour Williams, myself, the leader of the opposition, so on. So, we agreed to most everything and have kept them and expanded and gone ahead of them in many instances. There's one thing that we didn't agree with, and it was that the junior stock exchange should be abolished. We absolutely said no. Manayad almost went ballistic. I was writing in the Gleaner. I was the chief financial columnist at the time. I took on the issue. Now Minister Williams was writing also in other newspapers. We made it absolutely clear. And in early 2016, before the February election, then leader of the opposition, Andrew Holness, went to the stock exchange and said, not only will we keep it, we will expand it. And we've done that, and we have just expanded it from 500 million, Mr. President, to 750 million. Go and invest in this junior stock exchange. No taxes up to that period of time. It's a great initiative by the Andrew Holness administration. And even they will have to admit, because this junior stock exchange has increased the amount of money that has been brought into the economy that people could normally get. The bill, Mr. President, the amendments contain, the bill relate to companies providing trust or corporate services. The House is asked to note that the International Corporate and Trust Provision of 2017 in 2021 was amended in 2021 to, among other things, change the name of the Act to the Trust and Corporate Services Providers, TCSP Act, and expand the scope of the legislation to be generally applicable to both international and domestic trust and corporate services providers. The amendments of the Act were in keeping with Jamaica's overall thrust to improve the anti-money laundering, counter-financing and terrorism, AML/CFT framework based on the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force mutual evaluation report on Jamaica in 2017, and allowed for the improvement in the regulatory requirements for providers of trust and corporate service. I want to break that down for you. Just recently, a few weeks ago, Mr. Johnson Smith, you remember, we had the FATF, the Caribbean FATF meeting here in Jamaica, first time ever. One of the good reasons is because a lot of work was done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where trade comes, the Ministry of Finance, and led by Maureen Sims from the Bank of Jamaica. But a lot of the heavy lifting was done in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Why? Simply because it dealt with beneficial ownership. And the Companies Office of Jamaica resides in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. And I got calls from Minister Clark at the time, and we would work. I remember Minister Johnson Smith and myself went through that entire bill. I can't speak for anybody else, but she and I went through it carefully. Minister of Justice was also involved. Everybody got involved, but we carried it, and the FATF team came here, and when the Secretary General, the senior secretary person from the OCD Secretariat came here to Jamaica, and we met at Jamaica House, they said the Jamaican response to the FATF, being on the FATF grey list, was so comprehensive and so exemplary that they will be using that as a format for other people who are on the grey list or blacklist. That's how good it is, and that's one reason, I'm very sure, Mr. President, that that conference was held in Montego Bay at our new resorts. Not in Montego Bay, in fact, it was in the Grill. A fabulous meeting that we have. The fact of to get that off allowed us to put this act in, the Trust and Corporate Services Providers TCSP Act, to make sure more of their services can be in Jamaica, to make sure GIFSA, which is something that we're scheduling and moving through the ministry, GIFSA can work. And why? Mr. President, I want you to hear this. Today, Bermuda has a per capita GDP. If you were to divide all the GDP in Bermuda among all your citizens, each citizen would be worth $125,841 US dollars. Bahamas, 35.8 thousand US dollars. Turks and Caicos Islands, 30.3 thousand US dollars. Barbados, 23,000. Trinidad, 20. Guyana, up from about 5 to 20. And Guyana will be above, I'm pretty sure, Bermuda in a short time, because Guyana has only 780,000 people in a landmass of 215,000 square kilometers, and they have 11 billion barrels of declared oil. They're going to be very rich. But where are we? We are at 6,839, coming from 5,000 2 or 3 years ago. We have been moving this, but 6.8 thousand US dollars can't be the per capita GDP that we in Jamaica must have. And since we're not going to be a major manufacturing country like a Mexico or the United States or anybody else of that size, we don't have the size anyway, we have to be services. But look at Cayman. Look at Cayman. Cayman is a small country, 125,000 US dollars as a per capita GDP. So we have to, and Minister Dana Morris Dixon is here, we're going to have to squeeze a lot more out of our 163 billion budget for education. So we educate our people differently. But above all, we're going to have to focus on building our financial services. Many of the people in Cayman, Turks and Caicos, BVI, there are many Jamaicans. We need to bring them back home to work with us in our financial services sector and make sure we become that place where they will come, and the law, the change in this Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, Mr. President, and also the fact that the Jamaica International Financial Services Authority, being carried through this ministry with the Ministry of Finance, will come to fruition in a very short part. We did the segregated accounts. Now we have to do the partnership, general and limited partnerships, to make a robust piece of legislation to make sure we can grow in the services. Mr. President, this act is a wonderful piece of legislation.
Yes.
I don't hear any knock. I don't hear. I'm not hearing.
It's that time of day. It's that time of day.
And so, Mr. President, on this as well, as I said, we're going to drop the taxes from 31 and 1/3% to 25% to make it work. The independent power providers, we mentioned that already. We want to, along with the bill that was mentioned earlier, we want to make sure we have a lot more renewable energy, renewable wind, renewable solar, and we're therefore, if you're doing 75% of your business in renewable, your tax rate is going to drop to 25%. Annual pension and exemption and age relief exemption. Come back to the people who government must help. The people who the Andrew Holness administration have been helping to make sure. And so we look at that what exists now, And we find, Mr. President, we want to provide further protection for this vulnerable group. It is proposed that the Income Tax Act be amended to increase both the annual pension exemption and the annual age relief exemption from Jamaican dollars 80,000 to $250,040 each. This is a major move, and this will result in an additional 2,046 taxpayers falling outside the tax net and the provision of more disposable income to the individuals in receipt of pension. This took place in April 1, 2024. Now, what does this mean, Mr. President? It goes with the philosophy that we have, that we believe Jamaicans can spend their money better than any government. And we spend their money well. So we want to make sure we exempt more people out of this tax bracket so that they can keep more of their income and they can spend it in a way that they see fit and not some government minister or bureaucrat telling them how to spend their money. So every time we hear that government is going to want to take money that they shouldn't take, you know we'll be over here. Increase in pension exemption, Mr. President. Given the effective date in April 1, 2024, for the increase in the pension exemption from 80,000 to 250,040 for calendar year 2024, and we're prorating it because it fell when it did in that year. Mr. President, persons eligible for the pension exemption are those in receipt of payment from a statutory pension scheme or an approved superannuation fund. For pensioners under the age of 55, the pension allowance is restricted to their pension income only. I don't have that number there, but I could get it. But I want to make sure, that I, from this position, encourage as many Jamaicans as possible to join a pension scheme. I am saying it publicly again. As many as possible, Jamaicans must join a pension scheme. I tell you, you know, Senator Fraser-Binns, when your salary comes, and while I want to make sure that government don't take it in taxes and you can spend it better, sometimes you spend too much. So it's good that your employer can take out some of it for the pension. Many employers match it. It is absolutely a no-brainer. I can't find a person who I would see that has any brain that a company like Grace or Wisynco or whoever else would want to say, I will match a portion of your income and put it to your pension, and you don't take it. You must make sure every one of you go and take it and save for pension for a later date. It's a wise thing to do. We are doing a lot on that. Yeah, man, we have done and we will get there. Increase in age exemption. Mr. President, individuals aged 65 and over are entitled to receive an age exemption that has been increased from $80,000 to $250,040. And it is going, because of resulting in an effective annual allowance of actually $207,000 for calendar year 2024. It has to be prorated. The annual personal income tax will go the same route, but that's interesting. That now is, we know about it. The government increased the annual personal income tax up to 1.5 from 1 million. That was a 50% increase. And it's now going up to 1.7 million. And it's part of the PAYE arrangement, an exemption that, again, we're making sure you keep more of your money and you spend it better than the government taking it. So 1.5, which is enshrined in our history, has now been enhanced and embellished to 1.7 million. Isn't that a great thing? Mr. President, with the increase in the income tax, many people, actually, annual threshold for the year 2024, again, because it's prorated, is 1.65. And the income tax people will tell you, there's a table in the bill which you see, impact on increased annual threshold on pension age and exemption. It tells you what that is. For 65 and over, pension exemption, 2024 was 207, 530. 2025 is 250,040. Age exemption was 207, and it's raised to 250 for people age 65 and over. The income tax threshold, of course, we just mentioned. So when you look at the total tax deduction and exemption, it is actually 2,065,000 to 2,200,000, and people who are in these brackets are much better off. Pensioners keeping more of their income so they can spend it better. I go to the junior stock exchange, coming to the end of this, Mr. President. The junior stock exchange will wake up everybody, including you, Senator Brown. So, I know you have stocks down there. You make all of money. And many of your friends over there are big in this thing. So, again, yeah, I mean, how can you even sit there and say that? I'm glad the mic isn't picking you up, because I don't want them to hear the nonsense you've just said. But Bloomberg saw us as having the best stock exchange in the world in a 5-year period just recently. So just calm yourself. So what we're looking at now is, how do you encourage small people? There's a young man that Danny Williams, Douglas Arain, introduced me to. No. No, but I did have the privilege of employing Chris Williams at NCB, and so you got him. But this young man he's the one who started the one-on-one IT company. And he has traveled with us to Guyana and elsewhere, selling his company. And he could never, in his early, maybe late 20s, Mr. Allen could never, ever get that kind of money without the junior stock exchange. And it absolutely changed his life and many others. I remember when he was going to be listed on the junior stock exchange, I was invited by Dr. Street Forest to be at the opening and to give a speech. And I was so pleased to see that the junior stock exchange had brought in billions of dollars to young people, some of them not so young, but most of them young. And they were able, and Mr. Allen from One is able to establish his business. You know what he's doing? Putting up wonderful ITs in schools so that the people, the kind of teaching that people get at Campion, never to mention Monroe, can now be given to people across the country on these wonderful screens, you know? So he's using technology, but he couldn't get ahead without the junior stock exchange. It's a great place where ordinary people who would not normally have access to money can find money to finance their ideas and to get ahead and to make their workers richer. Mr. President, I strongly support that. And so I'm very happy that the Andrew Holness administration is raising the level of which tax can be drawn. Now, if it was $500 million, you pay tax. No, no longer. $750 million. If your company is worth that, you won't pay taxes. And pretty soon we'll move it. Pretty soon we want to move it to $1 billion, but that will come. So, Mr. President, it must be noted that companies on the main stock exchange cannot and will not be able to move to the junior stock exchange because of this increase in the cap. This policy is applicable only to new entrants to the stock exchange. The clauses of the bill, Mr. President, I'll move through very quickly because we have them before us. Of course, we're talking about the Income Tax Amendment Act of 2025, amendment of Section 2 of the Principal Act. This definition section of the Act is amended by inserting the definitions independent power producers and amending the definition of regulated company. The amendment to regulated company clarifies the treatment of independent power producers and the persons issued a license under the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, which, though regulated in other legislation, will not be liable for the regulated company rate of 30% in the Income Tax Act. Section 12, Mr. President, treats with the types of income which are subject to exemptions under the Act. That's the amendment of Section 12 of the Principal Act. It also includes an exemption on a portion of the income of pensioners and individuals over the ages of 55 and 65 or who are incapacitated. The provisions originally treated periods from 2009 onwards as one due to the consistency of the rate. The amendment now provides, Mr. President, for each category of person, the extended rate from 2010 to 2023 and imposes the new rates from 2024 onwards. The 2024 year of assessment will have two rates capturing the rate from January to March 2024 at a prorate of the existing rate and April to December at a prorate portion of the new rate with 2025 and onwards, attracting the total new rate. Normally, that's done in prorating a tax when you bring a new amendment. Amendment of Section 30 of the Principal Act, Mr. President. This provision in the Act indicates the applicable rates for income tax. The period in the legislation treats with 2018 to the future. The amendment addresses the period from 2018 to 2023 at A and at B, inserts the rate as prorated from January to March, and then prorated from April to December using the new rate. Thereafter, the new rate will be applicable for the future. The amendment in Roman numeral 2 proposes to improve ease of reading in paragraph AB by changing the existing block text to a list and thereafter including the treatment for the current year of assessment. In Roman numeral 3, Mr. President, the bill proposes additional structural amendments to improve ease of reading and inserts the new rates for 1. Companies holding a license issued under the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, and 2, independent power producers which generate the prescribed percentage of electricity from prescribed renewable sources. Additionally, Mr. President, it was noted that the definitions of regulated company and unregulated company were duplicated in the Act. Thus, the amendment proposes that they be deleted from this section. Number 5, Mr. President, amendment of Section 32 of the Principal Act. The section treats with applications of the employment tax credit, ETC, very well known to people who operate in the Special Economic Zone and BPO and elsewhere. The amendment clarifies that companies holding licenses issued under the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act and independent power producers are not eligible persons for the purpose of the ETC. Clause, the next amendment, number 6, amendment of Section 67 of the Principal Act, Mr. President. The section treats with the submission of returns by employees, rather by employers for employees whose income tax or whose income exceeded a stated amount in each year of assessment. The amendment seeks to reformat the existing section, changing it from a block of text to a list indicating the prescribed amount, threshold, and its applicable year to improve ease of reading. The additions at L and M treat with the inclusion of the new rates prorated for 2024 and fully applied for future years of assessment, respectively. Number 7, Mr. President, the amendment of Section 68 of the Principal Act. This section treats with the duty of the individual to notify the commissioners where their income exceeds a stated amount in a stated year. The Amendment 1 changes the marginal note to be more generic, removing the need for changes in the future. 2, Mr. President, reformats the existing text from block text to a list to improve ease of reading. And 3, Mr. President, it inserts the prorated amounts for year of assessment 2024 and indicates the rate for the future. The 8th Amendment of Section 93 of the Principal Act, Mr. President, this is an amendment to the provision outlining the powers of the minister. This new insertion provides the minister with the power to prescribe the percentage of electricity which independent power producers must generate and the sources from which the electricity is to be generated. The policy rationale is that the percentage of energy sources should be easy to amend as the energy needs of the country evolve. And 9th and final, Mr. President, is the amendment to the 7th schedule to the Principal Act. The amendment increases the voting capital ceiling for subscribers in the junior stock exchange from $500 million Jamaican dollars to $750 million Jamaican dollars. Mr. President, I now invite members of this Honorable Senate to support the passage of the Income Tax Amendment Act 2024, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister Hill. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Minister has labored at length to make it seem that this is a hugely momentous bill when in his usual bombastic style. I remember well a few months ago him speaking to the booming economy. When we got the actual statistics, the economy had shrunk by 3.5% in the same period which he was talking about, the booming economy. So we know how much credibility to put with his words, to put on his words. But the fact is, what this bill is doing is tidying up some unintended consequences from previous entities. The truth is, the 33.33% tax on regulated institutions was really intended to capture financial institutions, those deposit-taking institutions regulated by the Bank of Jamaica, those regulated by the Financial Services Commission. But it inadvertently captured the international corporate and trust service providers, as well as the utilities, the utilities which are also regulated. So this is really just correcting an unintended consequence
that big
there.
tax was to pay for the 1.5, since some have no new tax.
Well, the truth of the matter is that tax should have been taken off. In fact, it was announced that it would be removed, sorry, not that tax, the asset tax for those same regulated entities was announced that it was to be removed in 2020, the then minister. And the industry in the interest of all that was happening with COVID, volunteered to postpone it. Well, and it was supposed to be just temporary. Well, I think they will be reluctant to volunteer again because this government has maintained it.
All of that thing that arbitrators
But the main figure that the minister gave that is of concern to me is that this increase in the tax threshold for pensioners will only impact 2,000 persons.
So many?
2,046 was the figure. 2,046.
He doesn't know the number.
No. What that really says is that all...
So how many in all we asked you and you didn't tell us?
No, this is, of course.
So how many in all? Okay, answer.
No.
See your tax people, they ask you.
How am I wrong?
Yes,
You said... Well, those are the people who will be impacted. The additional ones. The additional 2,400. The additional 2,046, I wrote down the figure. That's who will be impacted by this adjustment, 2,046. And I'm happy for those 2,046. But the point that it brings home is how few of our pensioners actually earn above the existing income tax threshold. So what it says, for example, and this 2,046 would include both government pensioners, public sector pensioners, and private sector pensioners. And if, even if you, I don't know what proportion you split it on, but there's a lot more private sector pensioners than there are government. Government has 33,000 pensioners. Now, how many of these? Probably a handful, a few hundred actually earn above the income tax threshold to benefit. What I think we need to really examine, and I don't say this in a partisan way, Mr. President,
teachers, police,
is that with the passage of time and with pensioners living longer, world over, we recognize that people are living longer. That's one of the reasons the pension age was increased. But what we see now is that persons who retire 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, some of them, the pension not even reaching minimum wage, much less to reach the income tax threshold. And I think it is our responsibility as a parliament to look at, particularly for government pensioners. Let us say we may not, in the first instance, look at the entire universe of pensioners, but I'm sure, Senator Gill, you would agree with me that we have a responsibility to look at government pensioners to ensure that those who serve long and hard but happened to retire many years ago and had the good fortune to continue living into their later years, that we don't put them in a impecunious position and where they are struggling to survive. So this signals to me that there are really very few pensioners who have an income in their later years that puts them at a level where they could even benefit from this modest increase in the threshold. We supported these amendments, but we really ask that we use this opportunity to really to take a deep dive into the situation of the pensioners in Jamaica, and in particular, the 33,000 government pensioners. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Gill.
President, You
Okay,
know,
yes. Before you move on, Senator Gill, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Question has been posed for the Senate to sit beyond 1:30 for the business to be concluded. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Senator Gill.
Thank you, President. You know, when it comes to income tax, it's a kind of taxations that workers would want to see benefits and even reprieve. A lot of workers will say, why, you know, I work hard and my earnings have gone into income tax. It was a bold move when this government made the recommendation to increase the income tax threshold to 1.5. And you know, some said it couldn't work. Relax, 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 because one of our trade union colleagues said that it could not work, not you. He said that it could not work. And the challenge I have, and the challenge I had then, how could you hear as a trade unionist that an administration was going to increase the income tax threshold for workers, and you say it couldn't work? For something like that, my first response would have been, let us see it happen. So we made that intention, and we not only made it as an intention, we fulfilled that mandate. And in doing so, we have decided that we're going to move it up further to 1.7 million. What that does, you know, President, is that it would have created more disposable income for the working class. It would have made measures to alleviate the pressure on households struggling with the cost of living. And by increasing disposable income, Mr. President, it stimulated consumption. Workers can save more, purchase more, provide for goods and services, and maybe that's why we can now celebrate an improvement and an enhancement in business confidence and consumer confidence. So it's a commendable move and must not be taken lightly. What I would want to encourage and to recommend and strongly suggest is that we continue to do the reviews to improve the threshold. Because what we'd be doing is that we would enable more individuals to benefit from tax-free income and earnings. Particularly, President, those who are at the lower income scale. And what we would also do is that we would also narrow the gap between income groups and foster a fairer distribution in wealth. So we must not only look at the income tax threshold, and I've heard the Honorable Prime Minister speaking about consolidating the taxes and tax collection. And I'm looking forward to what that would really mean. President, we must also, you know, look at additional measures. Expand subsidies on essential goods and services such as food and transportation to reduce the cost of living. And we must also continue to increase investment on low-cost housing projects to provide more options for the lower working class. So, President, I think it was an exceptional move made by this government, and it's something that has benefited the working class. And every time you move the threshold, you hear some other workers say to you, why, when it is going to reach my level of pay? Because it is something that workers look forward to. The question is that we have to be able to sustain that kind of move. And one of the ways to do that is to broaden, enhance the compliance of those who are continue to evade taxation. We need to seriously look at that. President, in terms of the enhanced pension and age relief exemption, you know, we might look today to examine the numbers. Whatever that number represents, it is a move in the right direction and persons are benefiting from it. It comes in twofold. The individuals under age 55 receiving the pension from an approved statutory pension scheme or an approved superannuation scheme, they get the exemption of the 80,000. And then you have the age relief exemption for another 80,000, which brings it to a total of 160,000. But I agree that, look, in the private sector, you would have had more pension schemes, yeah? In the public sector have, they were getting, for many years, low rates. This government did a reclassification which would have improved the rates for public sector workers. In the future, they are going to benefit more based on those levels of increases. It is impactful measures because it creates increased disposable income at a time when it is badly needed. It eases the cost of living. President, in my mind, we have to take strong measures in dealing with retirement savings. And I agree with the fact that we need to have more, in the scheme of things in the workplace, we need to encourage for the contract of employment to have more pension schemes. Workers cannot depend on any other support at a point in time when they need it. Gone are the days when you can say, well, I may depend on my picnic them. We are now talking about the question of financial wellness at a point in time in your life when you need it. And so, financial security at retirement is very critical. And I want to urge us, and Minister Hill spoke about the need to have more pension schemes. Yes, it should be promoted in more collective labor agreements for a demand for more retirement and pension schemes. Matter of fact, it should be a feature of employment to recommend that there is this savings towards your retirement. And I think it's in the workplace, in the labor force, in the employment, it should be a shared responsibility. One of the things I'd want to encourage for those who are the providers of the pension schemes, you're providing this suite of product in terms of retirement benefits. But if you're providing something to that magnitude and that level of importance, it is something that I want to urge them to speak about it, create that level of awareness in our own retirement savings so that people can understand, so that when it comes to the point of them even savings to towards their retirement, they understand the need and importance. One of the things I also want to encourage for those who are part of these schemes, you wait for the annual statements for you to receive the annual statements. In this digital age, in this transformation of digitalization, we must make some systems in place where people can track their investments. You don't have to wait for the end of the year to be here to be receiving the statements. And some of the schemes, the trustee is not even meeting with its members. And the carriers have an obligation to be engaging with the business that you're carrying out as part of the scheme. You must not wait until the FSC impose on you the fact that you have not met with your members. It is a fiduciary responsibility to meet and to engage with the members, to update them on the status of their savings. So, President, whilst we're talking about the taxation, I wanted to, as a trade unionist, highlight the importance of these two initiatives and strongly suggest that both of them requires constant reviews with an intention for improvement. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gale and Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't think you would have a difficulty recognizing me as a man from the West. Because I was wondering. I know it's a long time. We haven't seen each other.
So you move your colleague to your...
No, I usually sit here.
No, I mean that... Isn't she from the West?
Yeah, she is. But
Okay.
she has she's now more central. Northwest.
You're putting her into more trouble, right? Well, go ahead, Senator Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Boy, I don't hear this. You're not going to draw me out, I'm sorry. So I wasn't going to...
You're so chumped.
I don't want to say it. You see, I was trying not to say that word, but...
He's so chumped.
I really miss being with you all in the chamber. That's what this is saying. So I really wasn't going to contribute to this debate, but I thought it was fitting, since we're speaking about taxes and amendments to tax. In light of new developments, I thought I needed to make some brief comments. I agree with you, Senator Cavan Gale, that it is important for us to consider working people, the working class, and how they are able to fare, and how they're managing, and how they're able to live. And as such, any relief that can be provided to them should be provided. And it should never be a bone of contention. And sometimes we are inclined to believe that the people who need it most are only the ones at the lower rung. But in light of the realities that we are all facing, all of us need some relief. I know I need it. All of us need some relief. Not too long ago, I made what some might consider some bold recommendations. Correct, Mr. President? I made some bold recommendations after reviewing the realities in the tourism industry and the issues faced by those who work in it, whether they be line staff, supervisors, managers, or whomever. And I recall vividly the attempt at ridicule when I pointed out the need to remove taxes from gratuity. I didn't make the call simply to make headlines. I made the call because it was the right thing to do. Because this side believes in doing the right thing at any time, not only at certain times. So I call for the removal of tax on gratuity. And some tried to make it seem as though I did not understand the tourism industry, one which I have been involved in for the last 27 years. From I was a small child. And the attempt, and you notice I say attempt, the attempt at ridicule extended to cyber, you know, I wouldn't say attack. Social media. And many had much to say, but I'm relieved to see that my calls have been answered, because there are those who attempted to suggest that tips were the same as gratuity. And I've seen now where the Minister of Tourism has, on the heels of Fitur, has announced the removal of tax on gratuity. He hasn't indicated effectively when.
That is the trick.
The implementation date. When the people would begin to feel this relief which Senator Gale calls for.
Yeah.
So I am very curious, and I'm waiting anxiously, patiently, for the announcement of the date. Not that date, but the other date. But then again, I'm waiting on both dates. Because sometimes announcements are made, and they're made to claim that answers are being made to problems. But you see, because the next PNP government is intent on making certain things a reality, like the removal, as was done in 1991 when Mr. Patterson did it. When you go far back, I say nothing. So let me just say, Senator Hill, I'd like you to listen carefully. In 1991, when Mr. Patterson, then Minister of Finance, because of the improvements in the economy, saw it fit to remove taxes on gratuities. But then in 2007, was it? Or 2009, on Emancipation Day, no less, it was replaced by, as you recall, Manayard. Claims have been made. Claims have been made of how well the economy is doing. Never mind, no 5 in 4. But claims have been made how well the economy is doing. And I said it then in November 2024, and I'll say it again today, January 24, 2025, that the time really has come for the removal of tax on gratuity. So I am awaiting the date of implementation, because I would love to know when tourism workers at all levels, Senator Gale, not me, at least not yet. Tourism workers at all levels will receive this relief that they so desperately need. And because I take it so seriously, I pay attention to everything that is said. I pay attention to all that might be claimed. And I'm always emboldened when the challenge is made to suggest that I know not of what I speak. So, Mr. President, I had to add those few words because I think it is important to always remind and put things into context so we don't forget how we got here. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Minister Hill. Sorry, Senator Lambert Brown.
Don't worry about the vice. Don't worry about the vice. President, I rise to set the record straight on the 1.5. I was on radio, not nationwide. I was on radio. Ralston Hyman and I constantly spoke about this 1.5. We made it clear for the government to go to 1.5, they would have to tax the Jamaican people. The record will show that in 2016, the tax was so much that they had to phase it in. And they come back in 2017, and they tax again a total of $32 billion in taxes. And Senator Gill, those taxes were on food as well. And so the high prices we pay today include for petroleum, electricity.
Sorry, Senator
has to
Lambert.
do with the taxes that was put on the people.
Senator Brown, if there's a point of order, let me hear the point of order, and then I will hear it, and then I will determine if there is one or not.
The suggestion by Senator Brown that the administration imposed $32 billion in taxes on the people of Jamaica is not true. It is false, and I'd encourage him to desist from misleading the Parliament and the people of Jamaica.
All right,
thank you, sir.
Senator Lambert Brown, continue for me, please.
When your ignorance comes as a point of order, you should hide another desk. The revenue measures in this Parliament are in the library. And we can pull those revenue measures. $32 billion over 2 years in taxes. $32 billion. And so we see every day a price goes up, the tax on that thing goes up. And that explains why the prices are so high. And the people, because much of those consumption taxes was passed to the people. So we want to set that record straight. If you're really serious about reducing taxes, look for the people who are now over 6 million in earning and who are paying 33 1/3%. Put on to facilitate the 1.5. It is time to reduce that 33. Keep shouting. You finish? We'll keep talking. The 33 1/3% and people earning over $6 million was put on as part of that 1.5 package. Time to reduce it back to 25%. So that those who are paying 33 1/3 over 6 million should come back to 25%, just as you're doing for some companies who are favored by this government favor the people. Favor the people. Favor the people. Favor the people. Another thing I want to say, President, is that the government of Jamaica and Minister with responsibility for Art Trust, bear this in mind. There are workers whose contracts have been altered by this government and are owed money because you're taxing an agreement which should have allowed them, Senator Gill, and you know the story, to have earned their traveling tax-free. I know that the workers have written to the Art Trust through lawyers seeking that tax refund, which was a breach of their contract. I urge you not just to ease up the fear of trust and corporate. I urge you to look at the little workers who are being cheated out of their agreement. And President, you know I'm of the view that when it comes to income tax, uniform and laundry tax has been the same since early 2000. Before the Minister of Finance left, I spoke to him. And I believe, Senator Gill, you were in that meeting. And he was minded to make the adjustment. You supported me in that meeting. I know you did. You supported me, and I appreciate that. Now, I make it very clear that this government, when you come to the budget, your last budget fixed the uniform and laundry tax because we are going to do it in the next budget if you feel. I come also to the need for the 1971 income tax order relating, Senator Braham, to termination of employment. Time to fix that, to allow awards at the tribunal, for example, to go and be treated like debts in the courts. If you really care about the workers, I do that. And this, Mr. President, is a good point for me to just say my condolences to the family of former retired Justice Goldsmith, Marjorie Goldsmith, who died recently. She served at the tribunal, and she gave one of the biggest awards, individual award, for unfair dismissal. So I'll always remember her for that and her service in the judiciary. So that is something that you really have to be looking at, Senator Hill. How to ease the burden on those who have been unfairly treated. I hope you will do that. And again I say, I didn't intend to talk on this. But since my friend, good friend Senator Gill, mentioned this 1.5 and how great it is, we must also remember that it brought the burden of $32 billion in taxes, mainly on the poor people of Jamaica. And those taxes are continuing today. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lambert Brown. Senator Hill, Minister.
Mr. President, I appreciate the comments made by my colleagues, but appreciation is not agreement. So I listened to Senator Bunting treating the raising of the pensions threshold much like his party treated 1.5. Not something good, something you should avoid. Don't bother with it. It is, I didn't say you said it. I didn't say you say it. You must listen carefully. I speak very carefully. So I'm saying, in fact, Mr. President, it is relief that the leader of the JLP at the time, Most Honorable Andrew Holness now, that's what we took to the people, and they liked it. They wanted it. So the raising of the pension threshold should not be dependent on just the past. How many we have today? We're a government that manages for today and the future. We are putting in a pension plan that will encourage a lot more pensioners. You heard how passionately I felt and feel about the fact that a lot more Jamaicans must enter the pension system, the formal pension system. This is being put in there to help them to do that. So it's not just about the past. We are looking to the future as well. So the kind of cold water he tried to pour on this wise and innovative initiative would lead one to believe that because the actual number today could be larger, then we should do nothing. Don't bring it. No. Mr. President, I firmly reject that position. And because of that, my strong belief is to encourage many more pensioners to join, to be able to get this benefit, not to delay it until some big number joins. Yes, there are big numbers there already, but many more should join, and we want them to join the pension system, and that's why we're putting this in as well. I thank my colleague on this side, Senator Kevin Gale, for his fulsome support on this matter. It just makes sense, common sense. We on this side have put the amendment in place to raise the tax threshold and look forward to many more pensioners joining this benefit. In the case of the economy, Mr. President, we have today, just announced this week, the lowest unemployment figure in the history of this country, 3.5%. Mr. President, later this year, earlier this week, the latest survey of the Business, Investor, and Consumer Confidence for the fourth quarter of 2024, and that means, Mr. President, the quarter from October to December of last year, has recorded a surge in business confidence. Not my word. I'm taking the word surge from the survey. In business confidence, a solid rebound in investor confidence in the Jamaican climate of investment, the very one that we're told isn't doing so well. There's a surge in investor confidence and a similar rebound in consumer confidence. The Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, we laud the excellent findings quarter over quarter, and especially that these economic confidence numbers suggest that businesses, consumers and investors alike see and will welcome the fact that Jamaica is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, which arrived in 2019. Those numbers are back to pre-COVID numbers. That is something to celebrate in an economy of the size of Jamaica and doing so well. So when I spoke a few weeks ago, we have had rains in this country from the 3rd of July for months and months until nearly the end of December. In that period of time, that quarter, yes, our growth fell because agriculture is a major part of this economy. I do not withdraw that this economy is doing very well because all the other indicators, and you're going to find that the next months, now that the rains have stopped, agriculture is back, you're going to find the growth coming back, so we stand by those numbers. Yes, our unemployment is low, our economy is resilient, you're going to see the growth coming back. I've been traveling around the country, in St. Elizabeth, in Manchester, where they farm, and see the farmers getting their stuff in, Mr. President. I haven't been able to come to St. James yet, but I'll get there in time. But really and truly, we see that the economy is doing well. And I'm proud this morning to say that the Andrew Holness administration has managed an economy to the place where it continues to grow. Confidence is high, investors are high, investors are coming in, and truly, Mr. President, I recommend the second reading, is it, of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Income Tax Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. And we can just, there's no concern, no amendments, no nothing. All right, very well. So we have clauses 1 through 8, 9. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. We have the fourth schedule. No? So the schedule. So we have the title and the enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, I move for the third reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Income Tax Act, read a third time and passed.
And you heard me stumble with the last sentence, and I suppose that is a matter of fatigue and at this time, and so that we preserve our staff, we're going to have a suspension of the sitting for 30 minutes.
Mr. President, just indicating that I know Senator Bunting had indicated that he had an appointment to make, so he was asking, given that his presentation is 30 minutes, if we could hold through. I wonder if the staff would be able to, and then we refresh ourselves, or if the matter is so pressing that we would ask him if he could make up time on a highway or something. I don't know. No, I ask in good faith. I really do ask in good faith, Mr. President. The staff is present. We can get an indication whether it's possible.
The staff should take
so an additional hour is what you're saying, to just go through?
The press.
He had said half an hour.
The staff should take a break.
Oh, it's two? Yes, but I thought we would take a break. I didn't get a guarantee as to the length of the second presentation. So I didn't ask. My phrasing was quite specific. But Mr. President, I'll leave it in your hands with the clerk and just let you know what we were considering. Thank you to the technical team who was present from the Ministry of Finance and, of course, the legal support in ensuring that we were able to get through with another piece of legislation passed today. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Having had that consultation, we'll have a suspension for 30 minutes. So this Senate is suspended for 30 minutes. Thank you.